Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here, and particularly thank you to the brave members of law enforcement who have joined us. More than anyone, they understand the strain of an active shooter and what kind of strain it creates for law enforcement responding to a very serious crisis. And just to give you some context of the importance of this legislation, between 2000 and 2020, there were close to 400 active shooter events, including 40 active shooters in 2020 alone. In 2016, I know Congressman Upton will speak about this, we saw an Uber driver in Michigan go on a shooting rampage and then continue picking up passengers in his car. In 2019, a shooter drove around a community in Texas, killing 7 and wounding 25 people. And in 2021, a shooter traveled around murdering 8 people at various Atlanta spas. And in the last 6 weeks alone, sadly, we've seen active shooters make national headlines, murdering and wounding people in Buffalo, New York, Sacramento, California, New York City, and right here in Washington, D.C. These shootings have become ubiquitous, so frequent that some of these horrific events barely make headlines. This is not normal, and we cannot let it become normalized, but also we can't become numb to these events. This is not the time to settle for the status quo. We have to give law enforcement every tool they need to neutralize these threats and really mitigate the harms that come from them. In every single shooting, it was law enforcement running to the scene to apprehend the shooter, to help victims, and to keep the surrounding community safe. And in these stressful life or death situations, law enforcement are in too many cases relying on social media to communicate with the surrounding community so that no one accidentally walks into a line of fire or into a crime scene. Law enforcement needs and deserves better tools than Twitter to communicate with the community. The Active Shooter Alert creates an Amber Alert-like program for active shooter events. This bill will provide law enforcement with cutting-edge technology to send notifications to our smartphones and let communities know if there's an active shooter in certain areas so that we know to stay away. It's very common sense. And developing this kind of technology and infrastructure and identifying best practices would be a massive undertaking for any local department, and for some communities simply impossible to do because they just don't have the resources to do it on their own. However, we already have resources at the federal level. This legislation simply gives every law enforcement agency across the country access to the federal alert system to send alerts in their area. The bill also provides local law enforcement with access to expert develop best practices and protocols for sending out these alerts. And as we saw multiple times last year, when there is an active shooter situation, law enforcement does all they can to keep people in the surrounding area safe, including going person to person to either evacuate or tell people to shelter in place. But that takes time, and that time could cost lives. This type of alert system we're talking about today would be far more efficient and can also provide updates to the community so they're otherwise in situations that would be otherwise impossible to communicate in the midst of an active shooting threat. And so I'm very proud that this bill has earned the endorsement of law enforcement organizations across the country, national, local, and state level, some of whom are represented here today. And before I turn it over to some of these brave individuals, I want to thank every single officer who runs into the line of fire and has chosen to dedicate their lives to keeping our community safe. The least we can do is to provide them with the tools and resources they need to keep themselves safe on the job. And I just want to say before I introduce them, I am especially grateful to the leadership of Fred Upton, who is concluding his last term in Congress and has decided to retire, but has been a champion on so many issues, but was a quick and eager partner in this work and the lead Republican on this legislation. And I'm going to miss working with him, but I hope as a way to honor his service, we're going to get this bill to the president's desk, and it will be remembered for a long time as part of Fred's legacy here in Congress. Fred Upton. Thanks, David. Thank you.
Thank you. I was here on 9/11. I was then chairman of the telecommunications subcommittee. I went up to New York. We listened carefully to the 9/11 Commission and their report to try and make sure that it never happened again. And one of the things that we did was we wanted to make sure that law enforcement had the capability to communicate with each other. We actually made a huge transition from analog to digital to create broadband space so that they could communicate with each other. And it worked. It really did work. But now we need another tool in the toolbox too. We saw what happened this last weekend in Buffalo, but this has been an idea that David and I have had for many, many months. I live in neighborhoods where we do have active shooters. We had a terrible situation a few years in Kalamazoo where this what's described as an Uber shooter killed innocent people left and right. But we see that now across the country. And whereas law enforcement has the tools so that they can respond immediately, and they're running to the scene as fast as they can, it's that person next door. It might be the small business on Main Street next door or around the corner. And we've got the tools. Where is my phone? It's really easy to send the signal within a certain amount of space to say, watch out, take cover. We can do this with our schools, but what do you do with the innocent people that might be just walking down the street or trying to get some groceries on a weekend? This is bipartisan legislation. Law enforcement is behind it, and they have been from day one. I've talked to my law enforcement at home in Michigan. They support this. It's a way that they can be there to respond to the scene and get innocent people out of the area so that they can protect the rest of us. So let's get this done. It's the very end of the police week. I think we're going to see a commitment from the leadership here in the House to move the bill. I look forward to getting an invitation to the Rose Garden to sign this. And at the end of the day, we'll continue to save more lives, just like what the 9/11 Commission did 20-some years ago. With that, I want to introduce, I can say, a partner in crime, a good friend of mine, Mike Thompson. We've been together on a lot of different issues as we try to protect innocent people with common sense, bipartisan legislation. Mike Thompson from California.
Fred, thank you very much. And first, we're going to miss you, Fred.
I'm not gone yet.
I know, but you're going too soon. And you've been a partner to a lot of us on a lot of good public policy that's passed from this institution and has really helped the American people. And David, thank you. You've been a real leader in the gun violence prevention safety space, and it really shows. This idea is a great one. I say that as someone who's had mass shootings in my district. I'm someone who, as the chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, have visited so many survivors and so many communities that have been the ground zero for mass shootings. And I say that as someone who is the very proud father of a deputy sheriff. When law enforcement, as has been said, is Johnny on the spot. They are fantastic. We owe them so much. They do so much to protect us and our families and our communities. This takes it a step further. This allows that information to be shared so everyone has access to important, critically important information that may save their lives and will certainly help maneuver through the chaos that happens when there is a mass shooting. This is a bill that, as has been pointed out, is bipartisan. It's a bill that'll save lives. It's a bill that'll save money, and it's a bill that needs to be passed and sent to the President of the United States for his signature. And with that, I'd like to introduce another good partner, someone who cares deeply about these issues, Congresswoman Nancy Mace from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. David and Fred and Mike, I want to thank you all for working on this great piece of legislation. And I want to thank the law enforcement officials who are here with us today. Sadly, there's no greater time than the present to address these active shooter situations and mass shootings that we have. And I know that my home state of South Carolina, we are no stranger to these kinds of shootings. In fact, just a few weeks ago in North Charleston, South Carolina, on April 26th, there was a shooting in a parking lot next to a Little League baseball game that was going on one evening. Over 30 shots were fired between two individuals. And had this system been in place, we would have been better and faster been able to alert those in the community. But to see kids crawling off the baseball field and parents in tears because this happened in a parking lot right next to their Little League baseball game. Also, the area that I represent is home to a very historic black church in Mother Emanuel, where almost 7 years ago, 9 black church members were murdered there. And in a time like today where we are so divisive across the country, this is a place where we can all come together, as you can see here today, Republicans and Democrats alike, finding small ways to make a big difference in our communities, in our states, and in our nation. There is no reason not to do this legislation right now. There is no greater, more urgent need than right now. We're not infringing on anyone's constitutional rights, but we are using resources that are already available at the federal and state level, and giving the permission and resources to law enforcement and to states to implement this kind of system that acts just like an Amber Alert system and can and will save lives. So where we can work together, we absolutely should work together hand in hand, and I'm honored to be a part of this and hope that we will get more people on board and convince members in both chambers and convince the President of the United States to do this and to do this right now. We've got to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you to the newly engaged Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jonathan Thompson, who's the Executive Director and CEO of the National Sheriffs Association, which represents 3,080 sheriffs and their deputies all across the country.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. All of my notes are irrelevant now because I think what you've heard is a combination of factors here. Number one, this is doable. It is simple. It is efficient. It's cost efficient, it's legitimate, it doesn't trample anyone's constitutional rights, but what it does do is it gives the tools not just to the men and women in uniform, it gives the tools to our citizenry. Today, these four members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, have come out and they've said, we can fix a problem. We can do it simply, we can do it efficiently, but most importantly, we can do it with common sense. Sir, members, my hat's off to all of you. This is something that is long overdue. We can do this. We need it. The men and women in uniform behind us, whether it's the member's son who's a deputy sheriff, they need these tools. Crime is going up. We all know it. It's just one more tool that we've got to put into the arsenal. We need it. Now is the time. Right now, today. We have no more time to wait. So I want to thank you all. This is amazing. We can't do it without the Congress. We certainly can't do it without the President and the Justice Department, but every local agency needs this tool. So I'm going to ask everyone watching, anyone that can hear it, we need your help. Pick up the phone, call your member's office, implore them to do this, to vote for it. We have to do it now, today. So thank you very much. We appreciate it beyond words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And next, we'd like to invite Brian Porter, who is representing the National District Attorneys Association, which represents more than 5,000 members across the country, very actively supporting safety in communities, and have been a terrific partner in this work as well. Nice to see you.
Thank you for the invitation to speak today on behalf of the National District Attorneys Association, which is the oldest and largest national organization representing state and local prosecutors. I want to thank again everyone for the invitation to speak here today at today's press conference. In light of recent tragedies in New York and California, prosecutors around the country have joined their law enforcement partners in working to combat shooting tragedies and put an end to gun violence that plagues the communities we serve. This needed bipartisan effort would ensure law enforcement has the support it needs by appointing an active shooter alert coordinator within the Department of Justice to oversee federal training, technical support, and best practices to local and state law enforcement to effectively improve or implement active shooter alert systems. As someone who represents and prosecutes in a community that was the unfortunate location of the congressional baseball game shooting a couple of years ago, I have learned firsthand the impact these terrible events can have on communities. And so I'm very, very thankful to be here today to lend my personal support and the support of the National District Attorneys Association in endorsing this effort and prioritizing public safety. And generally, all prosecutors are proud to be a part of this effort to respond to the growing threat of gun violence facing the nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next, I would like to invite Peter Newsham, who is the chief of the Prince William County Police Department, and someone who I think can share the perspective of police officers who respond every day, unfortunately, across the country to these kinds of incidents. Thanks, Chief.
Very much. Good morning. I'm Pete Newsham. I'm the chief of the Prince William County Police Department in Prince William County, Virginia. I'm here on behalf of the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police to lend our ardent support to the Active Shooter Alert Act. I know that we all wish that we lived in a world where this type of legislation was unnecessary, but the unfortunate truth is that we don't. Last year, we saw nearly 700 mass shootings in our country, and so far this year, we've had over 200. The tragedy in Buffalo this past weekend, where 10 folks who were grocery shopping unnecessarily lost their lives, reminds us of our responsibility. We all have to do more to ensure that our communities are safe. The Active Shooter Alert Act will provide law enforcement with an additional tool to alert the public when these tragedies occur. Having the alert will be essential for ensuring that potential victims in the area are immediately alerted in the event of an active shooter. This will save lives by giving the potential victims in the area the ability to take steps to protect themselves. The other point, which is very important to note, is that the alert will be invaluable in ensuring that everyone in the area of an active shooter has a heightened vigilance. This vigilance will likely provide law enforcement with valuable information regarding the suspect that will assist us in more quickly bringing him into custody. On September 16th of 2013, while serving as an assistant chief here in Washington, D.C., I responded to the Washington Navy Yard after Aaron Alexis entered a building and indiscriminately began shooting and killing employees. I could say with certainty that if we had the ability to send immediate alerts to folks in the building and folks in the surrounding area, we would have used it. On behalf of the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police, I want to thank Congressman Cicilline and Congressman Upton for sponsoring this legislation. I want to thank the other Congress members for supporting it. We believe it is a common sense approach to enhanced public safety will ultimately save lives when these unforeseen tragedies occur. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. And our final speaker is Lieutenant Mejia, who serves with the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington. He's also the Emergency Response Team Supervisor and very recently responded to an active shooter sniper incident in Northwest Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, and attending law enforcement partners. My name is Carlos Mejia. I supervise the Metropolitan Police Department's Emergency Response Team. The Emergency Response Team is comprised of special weapons and tactics operators and negotiators. Our team responds to all critical incidents occurring in the city, including criminal barricades, high-risk warrants, active shooter events, and acts of terrorism. The circumstances that bring us together this morning are unfortunate, and the conversation can be difficult. However, the time for action is evident from the frequency of active shooter events that are happening across our country. We know these tragedies occur in all types of neighborhoods, affect all demographics, and can happen without obvious warning signs. The numbers are staggering, the lives lost are unnecessary, and there must be a collective approach to keep the community safe. The impact of these incidents scar society, and the livelihoods of people within those cities, suburbs, and towns are forever adversely impacted. Despite efforts over the past few decades, gun-related violence remains a troublesome, persistent public safety issue, and we must do everything in our power to keep people safe. This requires lawmakers and first responders to propose solutions. Therefore, it is important that I stand here today as a symbol of the partnerships that it will take between police, government, media, and community to identify, support bills that will successfully help keep people safe during active shooter situations. Part of law enforcement's response to imminent threats includes community notifications, and first responders should be equipped with the ability to share critical, life-saving information with the community members in real time. Moreover, timely communication during these critical situations can foster trust and confidence, both of which are vital in a crisis. Here in D.C., we have made progress in reducing violent crime through focusing on the removal of illegal firearms from the community and ensuring that repeat offenders are held accountable. But we are also policing in the nation's capital, where access to assault-style weapons is just a short drive away into one's neighboring states. Just last month, a 23-year-old man equipped with multiple firearms he obtained in Virginia positioned himself in a fifth-floor apartment window where he unleashed 240 rounds of ammunition into a school alleyway. 4 people were shot, including a 12-year-old girl and a former MPD officer, but fortunately, there was no loss of life. This incident could have been much worse, like what we have recently seen in other communities across the nation. Active shooters events are high stress, resource intensive, and require tactically sound decisions. As a DC resident and father to DC school students, this event impacted me, my family, and my community. I responded to that scene and coordinated the law enforcement tactical response in coordination with our SWAT partners, with MPD, the United States Secret Service, U.S. Capitol Police, U.S. Park Police, the FBI, and the ATF. We were able to mitigate this threat and safely evacuate hundreds of community members and sheltered students. This does not take into account the hundreds of patrol officers, detectives, firefighters, and medics that were required to accomplish this goal. One effective tool for law enforcement to relay vital information is an instantaneous community alert system specific to active shooters. Passage of this bill could potentially save countless lives, and that is something we can get behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant. I think that is everyone. Happy to take any questions, and I know I'll give the difficult ones to Mr. Upton. If not, yes.
Morning. I wanted to ask you all what the response has been to this from leadership, from the Judiciary Committee. How quickly do you think this could get on the floor?
My hope, I think there's been general support from everyone I've spoken to.
We're Cubs fans, so we're optimists.
We're optimists, yeah. My hope is that it will be marked up soon in the Judiciary Committee and come to the floor, hopefully in the month of June.
Congressman, what have some of your colleagues said about this? Obviously, when it comes to legislation like this, you just want to make sure everything gets approved, gets all the bells and whistles checked so that it can speedily go through. Have you heard any commentary from your colleagues? Anything that they think you should add to it?
No, I mean, I will say, I've worked very closely with Mr. Upton, so I think, we've been very careful in the crafting of the legislation. I want to acknowledge Larson from my staff who's been leading this work. We've worked very closely with the Department of Justice, with law enforcement leadership across the country. So I think the bill addresses any issues that have been raised. So I think it's in really good shape. And frankly, everyone I've had the opportunity to speak to on both sides of the aisle has signed up as a co-sponsor or committed to voting for it. So I hope this will be a big, strong bipartisan vote, and I hope it will happen soon. Every day we wait, I think, is...
Let me just add one thing. When you talk to your colleagues, it is personal. We're all normal people. These things, we see them all the time. I mean, told David that I have a very good friend who's at the Navy Yard today. Forgot about it till he reminded me. He never went back to his desk. Never. His colleagues were killed. We have shootings in our districts. What happened this weekend was terrible. It impacted everybody. I have a relative that was there in Vegas, that concert when the guy shot from the 33rd floor or whatever it was. She's deaf. She's a special ed teacher. She had no clue what was happening. This will change that. So we all have these stories. We can get it done.
To follow up on that, so obviously there's been plenty of scenarios throughout the country that would prompt this legislation in terms of timing. The most recent shooting happened in Buffalo. Was that one of the main boons that really pushed this to come?
No, actually, we've been working on this for months. It's an example of how frequently these active shooter events happen and how urgent this legislation is.
Sorry, just one more question. Can you talk about why, you also laid out your arguments for why this is something that you think both parties can get behind, just given how controversial, gun control has been up here over the years in response to issues. Why do you think this is something that, can you just explain how this is?
Yeah, first of all, this is a public safety bill. It's not really a gun bill, to be honest. It's a public safety bill, and I think whether there may be some different viewpoints on more sort of gun safety legislation that relates to the use of firearms. This is really just a common sense bill to protect communities and to protect law enforcement who go into these dangerous situations. And I think both Republicans and Democrats have always supported law enforcement, have always supported doing everything we can to keep our constituents safe. And so I think this is one where my expectation is, as I said, Republicans and Democrats will support it on the floor. And I think because we've worked so closely with law enforcement in crafting this, people understand this is really about keeping our communities safe, and particularly keeping the men and women of law enforcement who are doing the dangerous and hard work to keep us safe, particularly protected in these very dangerous, volatile, quick-moving situations with active shooters.
And I'll just add one
Yeah, of
thing
course.
too. They put a lot of thought into this. This is nothing to do with gun control. This doesn't infringe on anyone's constitutional rights. And so where we can find agreement and make a difference in our communities, there's not a single American that would oppose a bill like this. It's not going to cost money either. The resources are there. This gives the authority to the states and law enforcement to be able to do this alert system, just like the Amber Alert system that's already existing. The framework is there. And so when we're looking at this kind of violence that is increasing and has increased over the last couple of years, and finding ways where we can work together, this is ripe, this is urgent, this is real, and I'm really grateful for the thoughtfulness that went into this and ensuring that both sides of the aisle can support it. And because of what happened last week and because of the shooting we saw in my district a few weeks ago, there's no time like the present. This is urgent and this needs to get done. And Americans across the country need to hammer it home to their members of Congress in the Senate and the House. Get on this bill, put pressure on leadership, and get it done. This is a place where we actually can agree on and work together on, and it can be swift. This can be done very quickly with the right kind of pressure. And so call your members of Congress, get them on board, and let's get going.
That sounds like a good note to end on.
All right.
Thank you
Yes,
again.
Enjoy the day.
Good.
Yes, sir.